Welcome. We're glad you are joining us tonight as we remember together, as we commemorate Yom HaShoah, the day of remembrance for the Holocaust. We begin with silence. The silence of death, the silence after destruction. There are times when songs falter, when darkness fills life, when martyrdom becomes a constellation of faith against the unrelieved black of space about us. There are no words to reach beyond the edge of night, no messenger to tell the full tale. There is only silence, the silence of Job, the silence of the 6 million, the silence of memory. Let us remember them as we link our silences. Andrew, if you want to spotlight the candles. Thank you. As we light 6 yellow candles, each one symbolizing a million people. Cantor, you can go ahead.
אשרי הגפרור שנשרף והציד להבות. אשרי הלהבה שברא בסתרי לבבות. אשרי הלבבות שידעו לחדול בכבוד. אשרי הגפרור שנשרף והציד להבות. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that softly burns in a heart's secret place. Blessed the hearts that like flickering lights knew to flutter and die without shame. Blessed is the match consumed in a kindling flame.
In the presence of eyes which witnessed the slaughter, which saw the oppression the heart could not bear, and as witness the heart that once taught compassion until the days came to pass that crushed human feeling, I have taken an oath to remember it all, to remember, not once to forget. Forget not one thing to the last generation, when degradation shall cease to the last, to its ending, when the rod of instruction shall have come to conclusion. An oath, not in vain, passed over the night of the terror. An oath, no morning shall see me at flesh pots again. an oath, lest from this we learned nothing. Lucy. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. When the wise child asks, "Please explain to me the details of the Holocaust." To this child, you respond, "The story of the Holocaust is long and complex. It begins with the story of Christian anti-Semitism and German nationalism, and concludes with the defeat of Germany and the liberation of our camps. Our libraries contain many books. Our educational institutions offer many courses. Go and study."
The wicked child says, "Whoa."
Go back one, please. Here we go.
The wicked child says, "Why do you care about what the Nazis did to them?" This child says, "You and them, and not we and us." To this child, you must respond, "You separate yourselves from the Jews of Europe. If you had been there, the Nazis would not have recognized the separation, and you too would have perished. By separating yourselves from the community which honors the memory of the 6 million, you place yourself on the side of the Nazis' collaborators, those who aided them in their attempt to destroy the Jewish people."
The simple child asks, "What is the Holocaust?" To this child, one replies simply, 70 years ago, there arose in Germany a group who called themselves the Nazis, led by a man named Adolf Hitler. They wanted to destroy all the Jews in the world. They killed 6 million of our own people before they were stopped.
The child who does not know how to ask looks at the burning Yahrzeit candles with questioning eyes and silent lips. To this child, we say, "We light these 6 candles to remember the 6 million Jews who died during the Holocaust."
Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, be'emunah shelema, beviat HaMashiach, beviat HaMashiach ani ma'amin, ואף על פי שיתממח, עם כל זה אני מאמין, אני מאמין, אני מאמין.
During the Holocaust, 3 scholars put God on trial. They felt God was wrong, but after they said it, they all began to pray to God, maybe for God. May God's name be glorified and sanctified in the world which was created by the divine will. May God establish sovereignty here below by your lives in your days soon. May God send liberation and healing to give life here on earth. And may God's rule in the divine name be restored again, as we say, Amen. May the one who makes peace in the heavens bring peace here below. And may God keep us, those below, in close bond with that Israel which lives on the other side, which flourishes as a tree near eternal streams. And answer, Amen.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך, ברוך אדוני המבורך, לעולם ועד.
Our God, creator of the universe, we come before you in the darkness of evening with memories of a terrifying night.
A night which did not pass and a day which did not dawn. a time when the earth was a planet gone bloody.
A night when countless numbers of our people were tortured and murdered.
O God, listen to our memories, the nightmares of our longest night.
One can hear the sleepers breathing and snoring. Many lick their lips and move their jaws. They're dreaming of eating. You not only see the food, you feel it in your hands. You are aware of its rich and striking smell. Someone in the dream holds it up to your lips, but circumstances prevent the consummation of the act. So our nights drag on. The dreams are woven into indistinct images. The suffering of the day, composed of hunger, blows, cold, exhaustion, fear, turns at nighttime into shapeless nightmares of unheard of violence. One wakes up at every moment frozen with terror, shaking in every limb. For the whole duration of the night, cutting across the alternating expectancy and terror of the moment of the reveal keeps watch.
Eternal of all worlds, who changes the times and varies the seasons, who arranges the stars in their courses in the sky.
Take notice of the long night of suffering when you seemed so distant. Remember when Israel, God's midnight singer, perished in a nighttime of darkness.
Ahavat olam Beit Yisrael Amcha ahavta Torah u'mitzvot chukim u'mishpatim otanu limadeta Al ken Adonai Eloheinu b'shochvenu v'kumenu nasiach b'chukecha v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד. כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגע יומם ולילה. ואהבתך תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני, אוהב עמו ישראל. שמע ישראל, אדוני אלוהינו, אדוני אחד. ברוך שם כבוד מלכותו לעולם ועד.
You shall love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And you shall take to heart all the words of Torah which I command you today.
For Torah guides us to goodness, directs us away from evil, and prods us from indifference. It teaches us to mend our world, an especially urgent task after Auschwitz.
You shall teach them to your children and speak of them when you are at home and when you are away from home, when you lie down at night and when you awaken in the morning.
You shall commit yourself to the survival of our people, a mitzvah of compelling importance after the Shoah.
You shall bind them for a sign on your hand and as a symbol before your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
You shall remember and do all my commandments and be holy before your God, for all are responsible to struggle against evil.
I am Adonai, your God. I brought you from the land of Egypt to be your God. I, Adonai, am your God. True and certain it is that you are the God of all the world. True and certain it is that your rule transcends all tyrants, redeems all suffering. After 400 years, you redeemed us from slavery. You brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand.
מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נדר בקודש נורא תהילות, אוסף אל נורא תהילות, אוסף אל.
Yet it is said, there is none like you among the mute, remaining silent and keeping still before those who inflict suffering upon us, before those who crushed your people and burned them. Show your wonders for all to see. Restore the remnant of your people and bring peace upon us once again.
מלכותך ראו בניך בוקי הים לפני משה ומרים זה ליאנו ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד.
After our people endured unspeakable suffering, God redeemed us and saved us from total destruction. A remnant has survived. There is new hope for the Jewish people. A remnant has returned to the land of Israel. Jews the world over rejoice in their heritage. May you soon fulfill your promise of redemption for all the world. Praised are you, Redeemer of Israel.
ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
Praised are you, Adonai, our God, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah.
Who remembers the compassion of our ancestors.
Remember the loving kindness of our people. In my village, Persbors, there were tens of poor shopkeepers who had no money to buy merchandise for the fair, but there were always people who lent them money. When I think about those times, I can see how strong was the will to not let anyone perish, to help a poor person celebrate the wedding of a spinster daughter.
God of our fathers and mothers, who remembers the suffering of our people.
Remember Jacob, firstborn in the grapple of gray morning where all birth is written in blood upon the dawn. Remember Rachel, who knows the place where the end of the way was torn in flames from the prophets' bodies.
Shield of Abraham and Sarah, remember those who perished. Remember those who fought. Remember those who survived. Remember and protect the people of Israel. Remember and bring redemption to their descendants.
Praised are you, Adonai, shield of our people. Adonai, you bind the living and the dead together in lasting fabric.
You renew life beyond death. You keep faith with those who sleep in dust. Keep faith with parents and children.
Keep faith, O God, with Arthur New. His daughter remembers. Before the Shoah, every Friday night, my father went to the synagogue, came home, and made Kiddush. When I was a little girl, he took my hand and we walked around the room singing Shalom Aleichem.
Keep faith, O God, with the child and her father.
Keep faith, O God, with those who were murdered at Treblinka. At the gas chamber, I was chosen to work there as a barber. The Germans needed the women's hair for their purposes. They told us, make all those women believe that they are just taking a haircut. We already knew that this room was the last place they went in alive. Some of the women that came in on a transport from my town, I knew them. I lived with them in my town. And when they saw me, they started asking me, Abe, what's going to happen to us? What could you tell them?
Adonai, our God, keep faith with those who sleep in the dust. Bind them to you and to us in a lasting fabric.
Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kadoshim b'chol yom yahalalucha selah. You are holy, your name is holy, and those who are holy praise you every day. You are holy, your name is holy, and your creation praises you daily. You are holy, and human beings, each one created in your image, contain a spark of your holiness.
Dear God of holiness, remember those in ghettos and death camps who knew that life is holy and did simple acts of kindness.
Ilsa, a childhood friend of mine, once found a raspberry in the camp and carried it in her pocket all day long to present to me that night on a leaf. Imagine a world in which your entire possession is one raspberry and you give it to your friend.
O God of holiness, remember those in ghettos and death camps who knew that life is holy yet took their own lives rather than cooperate in the killing of their people.
Adam Czerniakow, president of the Jewish Council of Warsaw, realized that there was no future for the ghetto. The Jews would be killed. By 4 p.m. on July 22nd, he was to have 6,000 men, women, and children chosen for transport to the east. He is terribly worried that the orphans will be deported and repeatedly brings up the orphans. If he cannot take care of the orphans, then he has lost his war. He has lost his struggle. He killed himself on July 23rd.
Dear God of holiness, remember those who knew that life is holy and rebelled against those who inflicted death.
Prisoners who met the trains at Auschwitz would give warnings. Do something. Fight back while you have your strength. In September 1944, there was a plan to blow up the gas chambers. There was a small Krupp factory nearby. Prisoners smuggled explosives, powder, and small arms. The men working in the gas chambers started to blow up the gas chambers. 2 were destroyed.
Holy One of Israel, remember all those in ghettos and death camps who knew that life is holy. Praised are you, Adonai, the Holy One of Israel.
Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el hakadosh. Blessed are you, Adonai, the Holy God. As we continue in place of the intermediate benedictions of the Amidah, we continue silently.
Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu be'amecha Yisrael u'tefilatam be'ahava tekabel u'tehi l'ratzon Tamid avodat Yisrael Yisrael Amecha El karov lechol korea penei el avadecha vechonenu שפוך רוחך עלינו ותחזינה עינינו בשובך לציון ברחמים ברוך אתה אדוני המחזיר שכינתו לציון
al hakvurot v'al hatshuot. We give thanks for the courage of our people, for their mighty deeds, for their faithfulness, and for the saved remnant which we commemorate today. In the days of the great European Jewish communities, the evil Hitler rose to power, plotting the destruction of all the Jews. Their plans to annihilate the Jewish people did not succeed, but 6 million of our people died, young and old, men and women and children. Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel, still lives. Today, as we remember and as we continue to live, let your name, our God and sovereign, be blessed and exalted forever and ever. God of our fathers and mothers, we have asked, has God forgotten how to pity? And yet we acknowledge that you are the foundation of our lives and our hope. And we thank you for your wonders which we experience each day. We thank you for the remnant which has survived, for those who built the land of Israel, for those who nurture Jewish life in all lands.
Shalom Rav, Har Yisrael Amecha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav, Har Yisrael Amecha, Tasim Leolam. Ki atahu melech adon lechol hashalom hashalom v'tov benecha levarech et amecha Yisrael bechol ed uvechol shah Bishlomecha. Shalom Rav, Har Yisrael Amecha, Tasim Leolam. Baruch Ata Adonai, HaMevarech et Amo Yisrael Bashalom.
We take a moment for quiet personal prayer and reflection.
Ose shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen.
We are, as a congregation, blessed to have Mark Holland with us, who coordinates so many different things. And tonight he is wearing his hat of having coordinated a lot of this evening's service, as well as our speaker. So I believe that we are going to turn to Mark to introduce our speaker. Mark, it will help if you unmute yourself, though.
Marty Ta has a very compelling story about his father, Charlie. Rather than even begin to convey some of the stories that Marty told me about his father, Charlie, Marty, just go ahead and tell our story. Tell your story about your dad.
Let me turn up the light for a second. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Well, first, thank you for joining me on this day of remembrance, and I'm very happy to be asked to present a story, a true story that I presented to many schools, synagogues, the museum, and even a couple churches. So it's a very important story. I'd like to communicate this to more to the children than the adults, because the children are the ones that carry it forward. As I talk to some of the children's students, they haven't had exposure to this other than maybe a couple days at school. So I'm very happy to present and share a story about my father. So I'm not sure, I hit share screen.
Yes.
And I don't know which one, but I'll try hitting this one.
Look for the PowerPoint that has the picture of the cover of your slide.
Yeah. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect, thank you. Well, here we go. I have about 15 minutes. Why doesn't it advance? It doesn't advance to the next screen.
Why don't you
Do I unshare?
try and click on that screen?
Got it. Thank you. Here's my father. That's about, he was about a couple years older before he passed away. This picture is my father. He had two car garages, repair garages, and he was always dressed like this. He's a mechanic. He owned his own business. He's been in car repair for many years. But here's my father, a fighter, a hero, and a Holocaust survivor. As you see in the picture, there's a bullet wound caption there, 1945 till 1951. So he had a bullet lodged in his cheek. He's wounded several times during the war, but he had a bullet that lodged into his cheek. He jumped out of a tank, or he was a small arm fire going into Berlin, and he was involved in some gunfire, and then he went into his mouth, and he thought it chipped the bone, but one of these bullets on the far left were lodged in his cheek for 6 years. He thought it was a chipped bone in his cheek, but it was a bullet. And when you get a sliver in your finger, how anxious are you to get that bullet or that sliver out of your finger? He had a bullet in his mouth for 6 years. And as a young boy, I remember him holding that bullet. His revenge was to survive. I only have like 15 minutes to present, but I speak to schools, and I have about 45 minutes. So I'm gonna kind of breeze through some of these slides. My father was born on July 7th, 1922. He's born Jewish in a small town called Zablata in Poland. Anti-Semitism was hatred, discrimination was in rise in Europe, driven by the Nazi Germany, where 6 million people, Jews, died. My father had two brothers and a mother and a father, parents of local peddlers, mainly dairy products outside of the town. He had to run away from home at the age of 18. And I can get into a little bit more in a future slide, but his choice was to be taken away into a ghetto, a labor camp or death camp, or run away and survive. So he survived and fought and lived in the forest. He fought in two wars, World War II and the Independence War, and was wounded several times. And he traveled to the US to start a new life. So in the pictures down below are pictures that I remember my father sharing this with me. He was 24 years old on the left. You can see him in the center top. He was the commander of 4 Russian tanks. His commanders or his comrades were on the right there, the Russian, Soviet, and the left were the Americans, where he met the Americans before they went into Berlin at the Elbe River. And here's another picture when my dad was 34 years old. He was a gas station operator, and it was an article in the newspaper. And my father never shared that with me, but I found that out several years after my father passed away. And the far right is a picture of my dad before he passed away at the age of 73. My father grew up in a very small house on the outskirts of Zablata, Poland, until the Nazis came in and invaded the city and neighboring countryside of Poland. He attended a small school miles away from home with one classroom that taught multiple grades for boys and girls of many ages. My father told me that he had to walk, and it was only one teacher that had multiple children. So we're kind of spoiled with the schools we have back in those days, back in Europe. That's the way it was, taught. They had to walk to school, no buses, no cars. They had to walk. And so when the Nazis came into town, his parents told the three sons, and my father had two brothers younger than him, to run and hide in the neighboring forest until the Nazis left. Obviously, my father, his two younger brothers, refused to leave and stayed with the parents when my father, Charlie, went out back to hide in the forest. Shortly after the trucks left the area, my father returned home where the house was heavily destroyed. Both brothers and parents were sent away on trucks and never to be seen again, ever. So it's a pretty dramatic time for my father. This is when Charlie lost both parents, brothers, and his relatives taken by the Nazis on December 7th, 1941, at the age of 18. That's a pretty important date, December 7th, 1941. This was the very same day the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in Poland, or in the Pacific. So I'll remember that day for a long time. Obviously, my father afraid and everything, he just tried to live and survive another day. This is where he went into hiding from the Nazis in a nearby forest behind his hometown. 19 months in eastern Poland. He didn't go back home. He had no place to go other than run and hide because the Nazis were out there trying to locate all the Jews that were running away in the forest. 19 months. I can't imagine 19 hours being in the forest. He survived 19 months living off the land, going into barns, taking what he could, going out in the forest again. He did this for multiple months. He learned how to survive by living off the land, eating food from the farm fields, sleeping in barns, in caves that he made in the forest. He learned by watching the animals how they prepared to survive with eating and coping with harsh winters. My father taught me a lot as I was a young boy and growing up, how hard it was for him to survive and how people waste food and how he had to survive living in the wild in winter where there's no shelter. And he told me about the caves that he prepared in fall, preparing for winter in case he doesn't find a place to stay safe and warm. He dug caves, covered it with branches, and that's how he survived. So every day in winter, when I see cold winter out in the woods, I think of my father, how he survived. I don't know anyone that could have done that. He joined the partisan fighting group, fighting the Nazis with limited and hiding in the forest. He had limited weaponry. He had some knives and pistols. He had some other friends that he joined up with, but basically the partisan group was the only survival group that he knew of in the area in the forest. So after a while, he then joined the Russian army or the Soviet army. He trained in Siberia, fought in the front lines. He was a commander of 4 tanks. He never revealed he was Jewish. While the Russians, he was in Russia and fighting with the Russians. He couldn't trust no one he could trust, period. They didn't like Jews. And if they would have known he was a Jew, he would have not been trained in Siberia and never been a commander of 4 tanks. So he learned to keep his mouth shut and survive another day. He was wounded twice in the right leg And I remember seeing the wounds. I mean, he never went into a hospital. They sewed his leg up in the field. And they said, well, he's going to die of disease, gangrene. And he kept it clean by using vodka to keep his wound clean. He was once again wounded in the face near Berlin, Germany. And as I mentioned in the picture in the beginning, where he was wounded with small arm fire with a bullet in his cheek. He thought it was a bullet that grazed him. He was never hospitalized and was never treated he was just treated in the field. So in 1946, he traveled back, and that's obviously after the war ended. He traveled back to his hometown in Zablatów, Poland, which basically everybody, 8,000 Jews were mostly virtually gone. He never went back after that. There's nothing to live for in that city because it was just ruins. He went back, he never went into the ghetto or concentration camp, but hid in the forest and fought and survived. He traveled he traveled back to the U.S. after fighting in he fought in two wars, the World War II, and also fought in the Israeli war of 1948. I don't know if he fought in the tanks, but he was very trained on that. So I'm sure he's had some opportunity to fight the Egyptians during the 48 war. He spoke 7 languages. English, spoke mainly Yiddish and Hebrew at home. He spoke, again, 7 languages fluently because countries in Europe were like states in the US. They were close, and he learned how to speak the languages. And because he went in the Russian army, he was able to speak Russian and be able to communicate. So in his business in the US, when people would come in with some kind of a dialect or some kind of a accent, he picked that up and he started speaking their native language. That was amazing. So at the age of 30, he came to the US in 1951. So 48 was the Israeli Independence War. In 51, he came to the state with a bullet still lodged in his cheek. Years after the war, he finally had the bullet removed in Milwaukee. Not in Europe, but in Milwaukee. So basically, he came to Milwaukee, and he was in Sheboygan. That's where he was sponsored from Israel to go there, from some Jewish family, an attorney that sponsored my father. And then when he went to a trucking company to work as a truck mechanic, they said, "Why, Charlie, are you bleeding into your upper lip?" "I don't know. It's always bleeding." Well, they looked in his mouth and they saw a bullet. They pulled the bullet out 6 years after getting wounded. Again, he traveled to Milwaukee from New York, or from Israel to New York to Sheboygan. And he told me that they didn't understand him when he was immigrating into the US in New York. He had to go to Sheboygan. He didn't know how to pronounce Sheboygan. It was because he didn't speak English very well. He called it Shebogan. And I still remember him saying that. He met my mother in 1951. Parented 3 children, 2 sons, myself, my brother, and my sister Esther. They all live. My brother's in Ohio. My sister is in Mequon. I'm here in Bayside. My father started car businesses in multiple locations. His first station was on 59th in Lisbon. He had 4 gas stations in the Milwaukee area. He was robbed, held up multiple times in America. He's a Russian fighter, and he survived in the woods. And he had to deal with the American people getting people robbed and held up. A week before he passed away, I was working at Allen Bradley, Rockwell, downtown Milwaukee. And this is before the beeper or pagers and cell phones. He called me in my office phone. And he normally doesn't call me in the morning. He calls me in the evening or afternoon to come to work and help him at the gas station. He called me in the morning. He said, "I was just held up." I said, "You were held up? Why did you call the police?" He said, "I don't have to. I hit the person really hard. He's not going to get up." And he was 73 years old. He passed away April 2nd, 1995, which is just recently. 26 years ago, he passed away. He was recognized as a war hero. There was multiple articles written in Milwaukee Sentinel Journal, May 1955, and in New York Life magazine. And I went to Berlin with my wife on vacation maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and there was a museum, and my father didn't know that, but there was a big picture of him meeting the Americans, and that's the picture I showed you earlier, and I'll have another picture in a minute. But I saw that, I said, I couldn't believe it. A huge picture on a wall that had my father's picture. Here's just like the maps, just for people that don't know where Poland is relative to Germany and Russia, Ukraine. So again, Poland is right in the middle there, and my father lived in the far eastern corner of Poland. On the bottom, you'll see the partisan. That's what they looked like. I didn't have a picture of my father because back then he didn't have a camera. All he was telling me he was in a partisan group. So I took a picture of what partisans looked like. They just had small weaponry. And he lived in a small town called Kolomea, but Zaplata was a bigger city. On the right side is basically where the Jews were lined up to go on trucks and buses or trains from Kolomea. Here's a picture showing the Jews running in the forest and trying to hide and run from the Germans. This is in Eastern Europe. Approximately 6 million people were murdered in World War II, which is equal to the population of Wisconsin or Minneapolis or Minnesota or the entire country of Israel. So for people that don't know where Siberia is, my dad was about 21 years old at that time. He had to travel thousands of miles away on a train, not a coach line like Milwaukee to Chicago or to Minneapolis. It was an open train, thousands of miles away, no heat, no air conditioning, nothing. So he had to go from Poland, where they enlisted my father to fight in the Soviet war army. That's where he had to travel to the middle of Siberia. Here's what a picture is, what it looks like, open trains up on the top left. This is what it looked like, the trains that they used to travel from Europe to Siberia. And the center top is basically the Russians training to fight in the war in the winter against the Nazis. The far right is the tanks that my father used, the T-34 tank. And then basically the rifle down below, and you can see the tank. So basically, this is what I show the children when I present. Here are the pictures that I didn't know until many years when I was a young adult. My father was a kind of a war hero. He was where they met the Americans with the Russians, and he was center top. And this is a picture I saw in Berlin. So it was such an amazing picture. And this is at April 25th, 1945, about 68 miles from Berlin, when my father was only 24 years old at that time. It's amazing. So my father had to go, he went to Israel, and after the War of 48, he said, enough fighting, 2 wars, bloody wars, many people passed away and died. So he was sponsored by a Jewish family to go to America in 1951. I was born in 1953. So this is the ship my father took from Israel to New York. The bottom left is the immigration paper my father had to come into the US. So another important thing was on April 25th and 26th, 2020, in the German newspapers was the anniversary of the 75 years of the war ending. And this is on the right, a picture of Putin and Trump talking on the phone, congratulating each other about ending the war and joining the Russians and finishing up the war in Berlin. So there's a trailer on the hill of Trump and Putin talking. Here's a picture of my father in a newspaper article, May 1st, 1955, 10 years after the war. I was only 1 or 2 years old at that time. My dad was 34. So on the far left, you'll see a picture again of my father. Again, I didn't know about this until many years later. Again, when my father talked about the war, he didn't talk about the details. He didn't want to share the gloom, the hatred that went on and the killing. And when it was an anniversary, I don't know, back many years ago, the Milwaukee General Sentinel called me. Are you a relative of Charlie Thau? I said, yes. Can we come and interview you? So they came and interviewed me, and they wanted to put something in the paper. So they took this picture. They took a picture of my father in the garage, and upper top right is my father's garage. I helped build that in 1967, coming every day after school to help my father build it. And there's a picture of me in my kitchen. But when these newspaper article came out, I had 2 or 3 or 4 people come in the house, taking pictures, writing notes down. And I thought they're going to put a paragraph at the back end of a paper. The last page, maybe the last little paragraph. Guess what? Was on the Sunday paper, front page. That was amazing. Here's a picture of my father's one of his filling station before he passed away. He had this since 1967. So every day after school, I come on a bus and help put bricks on a scaffold to help build a station. Then after my father passed away, I sold the property and I watched the place being demolished. So sad. So his revenge was to survive, and he did. He's my father, my grandfather, one very tough guy. My best friend. So shortly after my dad died, a movie came out called Defiance. It was almost identical. What happened with this guy here had 2 brothers. They all ran in the forest, and it's a true story. So if you have a chance, go to the library and get this movie. It's spectacular. It says everything about what 3 brothers had to do to survive fighting the Nazis in the forest. That's my story about my father.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
So if there's any questions, I'm sure there are. Again, I present many to schools and synagogues and the museum, probably 50 in the last 3 years. And I really want to share this with the young people, because they're the ones that need to carry this forward. You know, we as young adults or adults, older adults, yeah, we heard about it, we hear about it, but the young adults do not understand and know about what it went on. So that's the story.
Question? Edie, do you have a question?
I just want to say something to Charlie. I knew your father's story many years ago. My father and my father-in-law and your
Yep.
father very good friends.
Yep.
I don't ever remembers.
What's your
Jacob
name? What's your name?
Did you remember Jacob Pump?
Oh, Pump, Mr. Pump. Oh yeah.
Yeah, he told us stories about your dad all the time. He was
Yeah.
just because your father, he knew your father from the station on Capitol.
Yep.
And he used to come home and tell my kids the stories about your dad and told us the stories. You did an outstanding job, by the way. I'm a child Holocaust survivor.
Yeah.
And my parents hid in the woods in Poland, and that's how they survived.
Yeah, I remember Mr. Pump. Yep. Very well. And you know, he knew a lot of cattle dealers and tailors, and they all knew my father, and they spoke multiple languages.
Yes.
They come into the station, they start speaking Polish, Russian, German, whatever, Yiddish. Yep.
My parents knew they could speak a number of different languages.
Such a
German.
wonderful thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your story.
Yep. And thank you for asking the question.
Mike?
Thank you so much. This has been really, really great. My question is about in your experience presenting, especially to young people, have you found certain ways of kind of connecting or getting through or making the stories of your father's experience relatable to youngsters nowadays?
Yes. Great question. That's why the first page of my presentation showed my father with the bullets. They kind of led into, hey, sick, and I tell him, hey, how would you, when you get a sliver in your finger, how quickly you want to have your parent or you try to get it out? He had a bullet in his mouth for 6 years. So as soon as you start that up, I got their attention. And then I start the detail. I spend a lot more time in presenting because children don't grasp it by just speaking in general. So I had to get into a little bit more detail. So I have about anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour to speak versus 15 minutes or so here. So again, everybody knows about the Holocaust and what happened. But when you talk about the younger generation, the children today, they don't have a clue what went on. And I'm afraid the discrimination and the hatred and what's going on in this country, we say we'll never forget. It's coming back again with all the hatred and stuff that's going on. If we don't take care of, controlling this, we're going to have another issue. So and some of the students come up to me after the presentation, they never heard and never knew about this. So that to me, I connected.
Lisa, did I see you had a hand up? Or no? No? Okay. Mark? Edie, I'll get back to you in 1 sec.
Okay.
My question, Marty, is do you have any more detail how your father transitioned from being a partisan to being a tank commander for a tank commander in the Soviet Army? I'd just be really, or did you never get that information?
Well, as a child, a son, my father, they never give you the details. They didn't want to explain what happened. So my brother and I and my sister, we'd sit and watch TV like F Troop or Combat or something at one more, in the afternoon, evening, watching TV on 3 channels that you had. And my father saw us watching. And he says, "What are you watching?" I said, "We're watching Hogan's Heroes." He said, "Oh, that's all fake." He says, I don't, he would never watch that. He says, "I don't want to remember this. This is black side of my life. I don't want to even think about it." He said, "This is all fake news." And he never got into the detail that I would love to hear, but he did so much damage when he was younger. He was just trying to survive and take revenge what happened to him and his parents and his two brothers. And I sure wouldn't want to meet my dad in a dark alley.
So when he was that tank commander, he fought. When did it start? And I think you said it ended in the taking of Berlin, right?
Yeah, he basically he's trained in Siberia, and obviously the tank training said there's no reverse on the tanks, you just go forward. And he says because he learned to live 19 months in the woods, he learned how to survive. Most people that were in the Russian training, most of them died from exposure, not eating, drinking. My father learned how to survive and store food and prepare for the next day. He was organized, whereas most were not. And he told me about the winters parking his tanks out in the forest. He said, you don't leave him run because the Nazis would hear it run. He shut them off. And then I said, how do you start tanks in the winter when it's cold? They don't have battery chargers. They shut everything off and they put lumber underneath the tank and they started on fire to heat up the tank. That's how he told me all the things like that. But there's so much he told me that I don't want to share on TV or on.
I understand.
It's unbelievable. And a week before he passed away, he was robbed. And he called me, he said he was robbed. I said, are you okay, Dad? I'll be up there in a minute. He said, oh, you don't have to rush. I said, call the police. I don't need to call the police. I hit that lady. She's not getting up. You hit a lady? The lady took a lot of money from my father and he hit her in the face, knocked her out.
And finally,
you don't attack my father, a war survivor, living like 19 months in the woods, and try to take his money. Not going to happen.
And finally, you should describe that photo your father's in with the Americans, meeting the Soviets at the Elbe River. That's not just any photo that he's in.
But when you go to Berlin
really
and see that in the museum, you go to Berlin and see it on a big wall, a big like 10-foot diameter or 10-foot dimension picture of my father. I never thought I'd see that.
I would just tell you as a personal observation, I was talking to Marty. He said, my dad's in this pretty well-known photo. And I thought, all right, I might recognize it because I like history. My jaw dropped when it was that photo. That is quite the photo.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Mr. Pump.
Yes, when I go around, I do speaking too for Herc. And it's important. I feel it's really important to teach that there were 6 million Jews murdered, but there were 4 million others. We cannot forget the 4 million others.
Yes. And these children that I'm teaching or presenting to, they had no idea. No idea. I think it's another war. That was it. But if you go see that movie, Defiance, and if you look at I have a trailer on one of the presentations, if you get a copy, if you take a look at where the Russians met the Americans, where they were walking together, trading chocolate, it was so touching to see the Americans and the Russians talking in different languages, and most common message they had were shaking hands.
Yes. I'm going to see that movie.
It's called Defiance, and then there's a trailer on this one of my presentations if you can get to it. It's a very amazing, very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marty, for sharing your father's story. Thank you, Mark, for making it happen also. We're so appreciative to get just a small glimpse of really the heroic life that he lived. Thank you so much.
Again, you want to say, remember the Holocaust. I remember my father every single day. Yeah. How I would have survived or would have never survived what he went through.
Thank you.
Anybody can do it if they want to take revenge and survive.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to return to the closing portion of our service. And we turn back to Cantor Barash.
Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachol v'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam, hachol v'hayam, rishru shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam. O God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart.
As we continue with Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים, לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא.
In the anguish of the Shoah and in the deliverance of a remnant, we see you, our God.
In light and in darkness, we affirm that you are our Creator, the one who walks with our people through history, the one with whom we walk through our own lives.
You are the one in whom we place our trust that you will remember the hopes of the slain by redeeming your shattered world.
You are the one in whom we place our trust that in spite of everything which strangles hope, you will help us to continue the sustaining song of their lives.
You are the one who strengthens our efforts to bring peace and justice to the world.
You are the one who strengthens our resolve to keep our people alive. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yiyeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad.
Creation follows destruction, and destruction follows creation. We lit 6 candles earlier to commemorate our dead. Soon these candles will flicker and die and return to darkness. Soon we begin to forget, and we must not let this happen. Let us kindle one more light, a yahrzeit candle to which we return each season. As we do, let us recite our prayer of memory and then our words of praise, which our poets intertwined with the memory of suffering as we rise.
El malei rachamim shochen b'mromim hametzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashechina במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את נשמות 6,000,000 אחינו ואחיותינו, שנהרגו על קידוש השם. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר Amen.
Fully compassionate God on high, to our 6,000,000 brothers and sisters murdered because they were Jews, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold them in the embrace of your wings, secure their souls in eternity. Eternal One, they are yours. May they rest in peace, as we all say, Amen. And as we turn to Mourner's Kaddish, to Kaddish Yatom, I invite you to unmute yourself so that our voices may join together in holy noise as we praise God with the words of Mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal, Kadash, Rabba, Be'alma, Yamlich Malchutei, Ayachon,
Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, hey,
Hey, Shlama Rabba,
all Israel.
Amen.
Oseh Shalom,
All Israel.
Amen.
May the one who creates peace on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, to which we say, Amen. Thank you all so much for coming together this evening, for being one community to come together and remember. Have a good rest of your evening and a meaningful rest of Yom HaShoah.